Welcome to the Stay-at-Home Nurse Podcast. I'm your host, Deanna Cooper Gillingham. For over 25 years, I've strived to use my nurse credentials to find work that fit my lifestyle, whether it was raising my 4 children and 3 fur babies, traveling the world, or moving to Mexico and living on the Caribbean Sea. Sometimes I succeeded, and sometimes I failed, but I always learned from the experience. Now, I want to help you by sharing what worked and what didn't work. There are so many opportunities out there for nurses today. The Stay-at-Home Nurse Podcast will inspire and equip you to have a nursing career that is meaningful and supports your lifestyle. Now let's get started. Welcome to this week's episode of the Stay-at-Home Nurse Podcast. This week we're going to talk about nurse intrapreneurship, nurse entrepreneurship, and nurse freelancer. One of my goals when starting this podcast was to open your eyes and your mind to different opportunities that are out there for nurses. And this week's episode will do just that. Let's start off with nurse intrapreneurship. What is a nurse intrapreneur? What is an intrapreneur? An intrapreneur is somebody who is very innovative within their organization. They might be somebody who would be a very good entrepreneur, but they choose to use their skills and their talents inside the organization that they're working for. They take ownership of their responsibilities and the role that they play. They think outside of the box. They're problem solvers. They always see the way to make things better. And they're not reactive. They're very proactive. Nurse intrapreneurs are a great asset to their organization, especially an organization who wants to grow and always be on the forefront. And let's face it, healthcare these days needs to always be thinking outside the box. Organizations who are doing things the way they've always done them are not lasting, but the organizations that are changing and pivoting with all the changes in healthcare are the ones that are surviving. These organizations truly value their nurse intrapreneurs. Oftentimes, these nurses work side by side with other nurses. But in addition to that, they may be on committees or hold other additional roles within the organization. Sometimes they even create new roles for themselves based on the innovation that they've come up with. As I've said, intrapreneurs make great entrepreneurs. And often they will eventually leave and start their own business and become an entrepreneur. But many of them stay with their companies because they like the security and they're in a good environment where people respect them and help them to flourish. For nurse intrapreneurs to really flourish, they have to understand how the hospital system works in a business sense. They need to know who the decision makers are in their organization, how to get to their ear, and how to present their ideas. If you'd like to learn more about nurse intrapreneurship, I invite you to listen to episode 11. We'll have a link in the show notes. Next, we're going to talk about nurse entrepreneurship. I talked more about why nurses make great entrepreneurs in episode 4, and we will link to that in the show notes also. Nurse entrepreneurs also are innovative. They take ownership. They think outside the box, they problem solve, and they're always looking for ways to make things better. But they do this outside of the organization. They do this in their own business. This is much riskier than intrapreneurship, but with greater risk comes greater reward. Nurse entrepreneurs are often small business owners, and small businesses are able to pivot and change much quicker than larger organizations. When a nurse entrepreneur has a new idea, she doesn't have to take it to anybody else to get approval. She can act on it immediately. Nurse entrepreneurs find a problem and then develop a solution. That could be in the form of a product or a service that they provide to others. They can provide this product or service to another business or to individuals. Because there is a greater risk with entrepreneurship, I recommend people starting off as a side hustle. What this is you start your business while you're still working your full-time job. Then maybe you work back to part-time, and then eventually you can quit and go with your business full-time. This is fairly easy for nurses to do because nurses have so many opportunities to work 12-hour shifts, 8-hour shifts, 4-hour shifts, part-time, per diem. We have the perfect opportunity to have a side hustle. And honestly, some nurses only want a side hustle. They enjoy their full-time or part-time nursing career, and they just want something on the side to do to bring in a little extra money. And that's fine. Entrepreneurship is great as a side hustle also. Now I'd like to take a second to compare intrapreneurship with entrepreneurship for those of you that are maybe entrepreneurs thinking about venturing out into entrepreneurship. So intrapreneurship has its constraints. You can't just go ahead because you had a great idea and act on it. You have to get permission, and going up the chain of command can sometimes be frustrating. With your own business, if you have a great idea and you've vetted it and you've decided it's one worth pursuing, you can go ahead and pursue it. Also, with entrepreneurship, you have more control over when and where you work. With intrapreneurship, you pretty much have to work when your employer wants you to work. And with entrepreneurship, the sky is the limit as far as earning potential. With intrapreneurship, you always have to negotiate your salary, and a lot of times it's going to be negotiated based on the position you have and not the value you bring to the organization. That may make entrepreneurship sound like the better option. But wait, there's downsides too. With intrapreneurship, you have the resources of your entire organization. They're going out and getting the clients. They're doing the advertising. They're doing the marketing. They're doing the selling. They also have housekeeping, cleaning the office, and they have a billing department sending out all the bills. They have a financial person who's doing all the bookkeeping. These are all things that you would need to do as an entrepreneur. Also, depending on the type of business that you have, if it's a service-based business, if you don't work, you don't get paid. There is no PTO time, there is no vacation time, and there is no sick time. Something else to take into consideration. And finally, yes, you can make unlimited amount of money as an entrepreneur, but there's no guarantee you'll make that money. You could also make zero. Now, believe me, I don't want to scare you away from entrepreneurship. I'm an entrepreneur. I think it's the best lifestyle, but there are things to take into consideration. Next, we're going to talk about freelancing. Freelancing is a little bit of a combination of the two. I read a really interesting article recently about how more and more nurses are becoming freelancers, so I thought this was a great topic for us to cover. So what is a freelance nurse? You may know of them as agency nurses, travel nurses, or per diem nurses. These nurses usually do not work for one particular hospital. Instead, they go from hospital to hospital. For example, when I worked as an agency nurse, the agency would call me with an offer of an assignment. It could be a 12-hour shift at a particular hospital on a particular unit. I could either accept or decline it. They would tell me what the pay rate was and any other benefits that might be available. Some of these offers came within a few hours' notice, while others were days or weeks in advance. Sometimes they were just one-off assignments, and sometimes they were multiple shifts. They could be at hospitals, long-term care facilities, skilled nursing facilities, and others. Travel nursing works very similarly, although the contracts are usually 3 months or more at a time, 12 weeks, but you were offered the assignment, told what hospital you'd be working for, whether you would only be working on one unit or whether you could be pulled to multiple units, and the salary and other benefits that were being offered, such as housing or transportation allowance. In my experience, per diem nurse is very similar to agency nurse, but you're working directly with the hospital. So there may be 2 or 3 hospitals near you that you are on as a per diem nurse, which means you can tell them what days you are available and what shifts you're available for, but you're usually the first one called off in the case of low census. One of the things I really loved about agency and travel nursing is that you could accept or reject any assignment, and everything is negotiable, including your salary, any stipends they offer, insurance, and your schedule. If you wanted a particular day or holiday off, you could have that written into the contract of your travel assignment. As an agency nurse, you could just not work that day and choose not to accept an assignment on that day. Salary was also very negotiable. You could really negotiate anything. It doesn't mean you would get it, but at least you could ask. Another thing I liked about agency and travel assignments were we had the saying that you could do anything for 12 weeks. And that's what most of our assignments were, 12 or 13-week assignments. And even if you got to a place and you really hated it, you knew it was ending in 12 or 13 weeks. And if you loved it, there was a good chance that they would extend your contract. Also, because you were not an employee of that organization, it was a lot easier to stay out of all of the hospital politics. And I have to say, I was always treated very well as an agency nurse and a travel nurse. They always knew that I had the option of not coming back if they didn't treat me well. So I was always treated very well. Now, the downside to agency and travel nursing is sometimes there are not assignments to accept. So you may go through some dry spells where you're not making any money. But usually when you are working, you're making very good money. And if you can balance that out and save, you can actually end up making a lot more in a year than you can working as a traditional nurse at a full-time job. Another potential downside for some people is you're always going to new hospitals and new systems and learning new things. So you have to learn where all the supplies are kept. You have to learn how to get into the computer system and how to use the equipment, and just basically learning how things are done there. But for those of us who don't mind always learning something new, there are many benefits, as I've stated earlier, that far outweigh these negatives. Okay, that's a wrap on this week's episode. I hope you learned something new. I hope your mind's been opened up to different ways of doing things, and I hope you've been inspired. Is there someone you know that would benefit from hearing this podcast episode? If so, I hope you'll share it with them. And I hope you'll hit subscribe so you hear every single episode. And one last thing, it would mean the world to me if you would leave a 5-star rating and review for this podcast.